The sun was just rising when the old farmer stepped out of his small wooden house. The cool air touched his face, and he took a slow breath, feeling the familiar smell of fresh soil and morning dew. This was the time of day he loved the most. The world was quiet, the fields were calm, and everything felt honest. Life on the farm was simple, but it was the kind of simple that gave him peace. He walked across the yard toward the fields, steps steady but a little slower than they used to be. Years of hard work had made his body stronger, then older, then tired. Still, he never complained. He had spent his whole life growing crops, fixing machines, feeding animals, and doing everything himself. It wasn't easy, but it was his life. He had never wished for anything more. People in town knew him as the quiet man who minded his own business. He wasn't the type to start a fight or argue with anyone. He believed that if you worked hard and treated others with respect, the world would treat you the same way. Most of the time, that belief carried him through life without trouble. But things were different now. For months. The town had been dealing with a group of men who moved from place to place, looking for weak spots. They would walk into small shops, farms, and roadside businesses and ask for payments to keep things safe. If someone refused or questioned them, strange things would happen. Broken tools, damaged vehicles, missing supplies. People whispered about them, but never said their names loudly. Fear had a way of keeping mouths shut. At first, the farmer didn't think much of it. He heard the stories, yes, but he never thought they would come to him. He didn't bother anyone, and he had nothing fancy that would attract attention. His farm was modest, his income steady, but never huge. He lived alone with one helper who came a few days a week. There was no reason for trouble to come knocking at his door. Still, trouble found a way. It started on a Tuesday morning, quiet and plain, like most days. The farmer was checking the irrigation pipes when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned and saw 3 men walking toward him. They wore casual clothes, but the look on their faces wasn't friendly. They had that sharp, confident expression people get when they believe no one can stop them. One of them smiled. But it wasn't a warm smile. The farmer nodded politely. "Morning." Smile widened. "Nice place you have here." The farmer didn't reply. He simply waited, feeling a small ache in his chest. He already knew where this was going. The man in front looked around the field, then back at the farmer. "We've been helping businesses in this area. Keeping things safe. Making sure no accidents happen. You understand, right?" The farmer kept his face calm. "This is a peaceful place. I don't think I need help." The man stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Everyone needs help, old man. Bad things can happen anywhere. But if you work with us, nothing happens to you. Simple as that." The farmer's throat went dry, but he didn't show it. He didn't want trouble, but he wouldn't be bullied either. "I appreciate your offer," said slowly, "but I can take care of my own place." The friendliness vanished from the man's face. He stared at the farmer like he was measuring him, trying to see how far he could push. "Think about it," the man said, tapping the farmer's chest lightly with 2 fingers. "We'll come back." They walked away as calmly as they had come, leaving behind an air of tension that the farmer couldn't shake off. He tried to continue his work, but his hands shook slightly. He knew meaning behind their words. He had heard the stories. Refusal wasn't as simple as saying no. People who said no had mysterious problems shortly after. Still, the farmer didn't tell anyone. Not even his son. His son. The thought of him brought a mix of pride and longing. The young man had left home years ago to work for a federal office. The father didn't fully understand. His son couldn't share details about his work. All the father ever heard was that it was important, and sometimes dangerous. He would call when he could, send messages when he had time, and visit once or twice a year. The farmer missed him, but he never said it out loud. He didn't want to distract him from his duty. If his son knew about the trouble, he would drop everything to come home. The father didn't want that. He didn't want to be the reason his son's career was affected, so he stayed quiet. For a few days, nothing happened. The farmer forced himself to believe that maybe the men were bluffing. Maybe they would forget about him and move on. But fear has a strange way of growing roots in the mind. One night, he heard a loud bang outside his window. He rushed outside with a flashlight and found one of his farming machines dented, its wires pulled out. A stone with a scribbled warning lay next to it. His heart sank. He felt the weight of being alone. No neighbors could help. They were scared too. The police department in town wasn't strong enough to handle organized troublemakers. Everyone pretended not to see what was happening. The farmer sat on a wooden stool inside the shed and stared at the broken machine. He felt anger, fear, and helplessness all at once. But most of all, he felt the sting of humiliation, something he had not felt in many years. He had always lived his life with dignity, treating others fairly. Now strangers walked onto his land and treated him like he was nothing. The next morning, the men returned. This time they didn't bother with smiles. They demanded money. Not a huge amount, but enough to hurt. Enough to remind him he wasn't in control anymore. He paid. Not because he wanted to, but because he had no choice. His crops were already behind schedule. He couldn't risk more damage. When they left, he stood there, holding the empty envelope, feeling smaller than he had ever felt. His hands trembled and his eyes burned, though he refused to let tears fall. He could face storms, droughts, broken equipment, but not intimidation. Not this. Days passed, and each payment became a sharp reminder that his freedom was slipping away piece by piece. He changed his routine. He stopped leaving home after dark. He double-checked locks. He slept lightly, always half-dash awake. No one in town asked questions. They only exchanged quiet looks, the kind that said, "We know, but also we can't help." One afternoon, while the farmer was repairing a fence, he heard a truck approaching. He felt his stomach tighten instantly, expecting another visit from the group. But when he turned, he froze. It wasn't them. It was a familiar blue truck. For a moment, he thought his eyes were playing tricks. Then the door opened, and his son stepped out. The farmer's lips parted in surprise. "You're home?" His son smiled, dropping his bag and walking over to embrace him. "Got some time off finally. Thought I'd surprise you?" The farmer tried to hide the pain in his chest, both emotional and physical. He didn't want his son to feel the trouble in his voice. So he forced a smile and patted his son's back. "It's good to see you," he said quietly. His son looked around. Noticing things immediately, the broken fence, the uneasiness in his father's eyes, the silent farm that normally had a warm rhythm. "You okay?" he asked gently. The farmer nodded quickly. "Just tired. Farm work, you know?" His son wasn't convinced. He wasn't the type to accept half answers. He watched his father carefully, reading the small changes, the pauses, the slight stiffness in his shoulders, the way he kept glancing at the driveway as if expecting someone. Later that evening, as they sat on the porch drinking tea, the son asked again, "Tell me what's going on." The farmer stared at the cup in his hand. The steam rose slowly, disappearing into the cool air. He finally sighed. "It's nothing you need to worry about, Dad." The farmer paused. He wanted to keep his son safe, but the truth was too heavy to carry alone anymore. He set the cup down and rubbed his forehead. "There are people. They come asking for money. They damaged some equipment. I didn't want to bother you with it." His son's eyes darkened not with fear, but with something firm, controlled, sharp, the kind of expression the farmer had seen only once, years ago. When his son spoke about training, "How long has this been happening?" he asked quietly. "A few weeks? And you didn't tell me?" "I didn't want to distract you," the farmer whispered. His son didn't speak right away. He simply looked at the fields, the broken machine near the shed, the marks on the dirt path left by unfriendly visitors. His jaw tightened slightly. "Dad," he said finally, "no one gets to walk into your life and treat you like this. Not while I'm here." The farmer felt both relief and worry. Relief because he wasn't alone anymore. Worry because he knew his son wasn't just any man. He was trained, smart and capable, but also bound by rules of his job. This wasn't his mission. This was personal. "You don't need to get involved," the farmer said softly. "I can manage." His son shook his head. "No, you shouldn't have had to manage this alone." That night, The son walked quietly around the property, studying everything: the damaged equipment, the path the men used, the areas with footprints, even the way the fence wires had been cut. His mind pieced everything together with a calmness that made the farmer both proud and uneasy. The son had always been protective, even as a child. He wasn't loud or aggressive. He was thoughtful, patient, and strategic. He didn't rush into things. But when he decided to act, he acted with full focus. The farmer watched him from the porch, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Shame for not being able to protect his home. Gratitude for his son's presence. Fear for what might come next. He whispered to himself, "They came to the wrong farm. They just don't know it yet." Somewhere in the shadows, the son was already thinking the same thing, and he was just getting started. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the wide fields, lighting up the old farmhouse with a warm, golden glow. The farmer woke early as usual, but this time he wasn't alone. His son was already outside, walking across the yard with focused eyes, studying every corner of the land as if it were a map only he could read. The father watched from the doorway for a moment, quietly admiring the young man he had raised. His son moved with calm confidence, the kind that came from years of training and experience he could never fully talk about. The father had never known the details, but he understood enough. His son was someone who handled serious situations with discipline, someone who had seen danger up close, and now that same person was walking across the farm, looking at broken fences and disturbed soil, trying to understand what had been happening while he was away. The farmer stepped outside and joined him. "You're up early," he said softly. His son nodded. "Couldn't sleep. Too much on my mind." The father sighed. "Shouldn't have told you. Should have told me sooner," his son replied, still scanning the property. "I needed to know." They walked side by side in silence for a moment. The fields stretched out around them, quiet and peaceful, yet the father no longer felt safe. He hated that feeling. This farm had always been his shelter, his world, but these last weeks had changed everything. His son crouched down by some tire tracks near the shed. "These are fresh," he said, "not from your truck." The father swallowed. "They come every few days, sometimes at night." His son didn't react with anger. He simply stood up, brushed the dirt off his hands, and looked toward the road. "They'll be back," he said calmly. "People like that always return when they think someone is scared." The father's chest tightened with worry. "Please, don't put yourself in danger." A small smile tugged at the corner of his son's mouth. "Dad, I've handled worse than this." The father didn't say anything more. He knew his son wasn't making a proud statement. He was telling the truth. Still, this wasn't a controlled mission or a planned operation with backup and equipment. This was home. And home meant emotions that could cloud judgment. Later that morning, the father tried to go about his routine. He watered the crops, cleaned out the chicken coop, and checked the irrigation pipes. His son stayed nearby, helping quietly without needing instructions. He fixed small things around the farm: loose boards, worn-out hinges, pieces of fencing that had been damaged. Everything he did was quick, precise, efficient, but even while working, his son kept one eye on the driveway, always alert, always scanning. By noon, the father could see the tension in his shoulders. "You're not here to fix fences," the father finally said. "You're waiting for them." The son paused and took a slow breath. "I need to see them. Need to understand who they are and how far they think they can go." The father felt a cold weight inside. And then what? The son looked at him with a steady, unreadable expression. "Then I'll decide." That answer didn't ease his fear, but he knew arguing wouldn't help. His son had already made up his mind. By late afternoon, the sky grew cloudy and gray, hinting that rain might come later. The father was inside preparing a simple meal when he heard the familiar growl of a truck engine pulling into the driveway. His breath hitched. "They're here," he whispered. His son stood near the window, watching calmly. "Stay inside," he said. "Let me handle it." The father shook his head. "I can't hide in my own home. Just stand back," his son said gently. "Please." The father hesitated, then stepped behind the doorframe as his son walked outside. The truck stopped in the yard. The same three men stepped out, the same ones who had threatened him weeks earlier and damaged his equipment. Their expressions were harsher this time, more impatient. They looked around, noticing the son immediately. One of them tilted his head. "Who's this?" he asked with a mocking tone. The son didn't flinch. "I live here," he said simply. The tallest man smirked. "Good. Maybe you can convince your old man to stay on schedule." The father felt anger boiling inside, but his son lifted a hand slightly without looking back, signaling him to stay calm. "What schedule?" son asked quietly. "You know," another man said, shrugging, "the payments, the ones he owes." The son stepped closer, his tone still calm but firmer. "There won't be any more payments." The men exchanged surprised looks, then started laughing. It wasn't real laughter. It was the kind people used when they thought someone was being foolish. "Look," the tallest man said, taking a step forward. "We've been real patient with your dad. Keep things peaceful around here. You pay us, nothing happens." Simple. The son didn't move. You damaged his equipment. You threatened him. Nothing about that is peaceful. The man waved his hand dismissively. "That's just business. Don't make it emotional." The son's eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm not emotional, but I'm telling you clearly this ends now." The laughter stopped. The leader's expression hardened. "Or what? You gonna do something?" The father felt his heart pounding. This was the moment he feared. He didn't know what his son planned, but he knew how easily situations like this could turn bad. The son didn't raise his voice. He didn't make threats. He simply took one small step closer and said, "You need to leave." For a few seconds, no one spoke. The tension in the air was heavy. The leader looked him up and down, then scoffed. "You think you're tough? This is between us and the old man. Stay out of it." The son didn't blink. "I am the old man's family, so now it's between us." One of the men made a sudden movement as if stepping forward, but the leader held up a hand, stopping him. He studied the son more carefully now. Maybe he noticed the steady eyes, the confident posture, the lack of fear. Or maybe he simply realized this wasn't going to be as easy as before. Either way, the leader didn't push further. "Fine," he said slowly. "We'll come back tomorrow. If you're smart, you'll change your mind by then." They walked back to their truck, muttering to each other before getting inside. The leader turned and pointed at the farmer standing near the doorway. "This isn't over," he said coldly. Then they drove off, leaving a trail of dust behind them. The father stepped outside immediately. "You provoked them," he said, panic rising in his voice. "They'll come back angrier." His son turned to him calmly. "They were always going to come back, but now I've seen them. I know exactly what kind of people we're dealing with." The father sat down on the porch steps, burying his face in his hands. "I didn't want this. I didn't want you to get involved." His son sat beside him. "I know, but they came into your life and tried to take your peace. That's not something I can ignore." The father stayed quiet for a long moment. The wind rustled through the trees, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of rain. Finally, he lifted his head. "What are you planning?" His son didn't answer right away. He looked out over the fields, the long rows of crops swaying lightly in the wind. The old barn standing quietly in the distance, the yard that held years of memories. "I'm going to make sure they never come back," he said softly. "But how?" the father asked, fear returning. His son stood up. "First, I need information. I need to know where they go, who they talk to, what they've done in town, and how many people they've hurt." "You're going to investigate them?" the father whispered. "Yes," his son replied, "and I'll do it quietly." That night, after dinner, the son walked into town alone. He visited small shops, chatted with owners, asked simple questions that didn't sound suspicious. People recognized him from years ago, and many were relieved to see him back. He learned things quickly: stories of threats, broken windows, stolen items, frightened families. Some people were afraid to talk, but his calm presence encouraged them. It told him more than they realized. And he listened to every detail with sharp focus. Meanwhile, back at the farm, the father paced nervously. He knew his son was capable. But the thought of him walking around town, gathering information in the dark, made his stomach twist. He had spent years worrying about his son's job, imagining danger far away. He never expected danger to follow them home. The son returned late. His clothes slightly dusty, his expression thoughtful. "You found something?" The father said. "Yes," the son replied, "and I'll find more." Over the next 2 days, the son continued gathering information. He followed patterns, observed routines, and learned where the extortion group spent their time. His training showed in every movement his patience, his alertness, his ability to blend in even when he stood out, but he didn't confront anyone. Not yet. He spent evenings at home with his father, reassuring him, helping on the farm during the day, and always keeping his phone close. Then, the father noticed how he kept checking messages, sending short updates, occasionally stepping outside to take calls in a low voice. On the third day, the father found him sitting on the porch before sunrise, staring at the horizon. "You're thinking about something?" the father said, sitting beside him. His son nodded slowly. "I need to make a call. A serious one." "A call to who?" His son turned to him, his voice steady but gentle. "Someone I work with. Someone who can help officially." The father froze. "No, this is our problem, not the government's." "It became their problem," his son said softly. "The moment these men threatened my family." The father felt a shiver run through him. Not because his son looked angry, he wasn't. He was calm. To calm, it was the kind of calm that came before decisive action. "You're sure about this?" The father whispered. His son nodded. "Yes, and it's the safest way. If I act alone, it could get messy. If I use the right channels, it'll be clean, legal, final." The father exhaled slowly, unable to hide his worry. "I trust you. I just don't want you to get in trouble for helping me." His son placed a hand on his shoulder. "I won't. I know how to handle this." As the sky grew brighter, the son stepped inside to make the call. His voice was low, his words careful. The father listened from the kitchen, unable to understand the coded language, but recognizing the tone professional. Controlled, absolute. When he hung up, he walked back outside and said quietly, "Things are going to change." The father looked at him. When his son answered with calm certainty, "Soon." Outside, the clouds began clearing, letting sunlight pour over the quiet farm. The fields moved gently in the wind, unaware of the storm that had begun shifting direction, and the father knew. Deep down, the men who had terrorized him had made a mistake far bigger. Then they understood they had chosen the wrong farm. And now the wrong man had returned home. The days that followed were strangely calm on the surface, but inside the farmhouse, the air felt heavy with anticipation. The father tried to keep things normal, waking early, tending to the animals, watering the crops. But even the soft sounds of nature, the birds on the roof, the rustle of leaves couldn't shake the uneasy feeling settling in his chest. His son remained on high alert, though he didn't show it openly. He helped with chores, fixed things that had been broken for months, and shared meals with the father. But there was something different in his eyes, a quiet intensity, like he was watching a long game unfold in his mind. He had made that call 2 days earlier. The father still didn't know exactly who he spoke to, only that his son's tone had changed the moment the call connected. It wasn't the voice of a son speaking to his father. It was the voice of someone speaking to people who held authority. After the call, the son simply said, "Everything is in motion." The father didn't ask more. He wasn't sure he wanted to know. On the 4th morning, just as the sun began to push light over the hills, the son walked into town alone. He didn't tell his father where he was going, but the father didn't need to ask. He watched from the porch as his son got into the truck and drove off, the engine humming to life in the stillness of dawn. The father sighed, rubbing his hands together. He trusted his son completely, but trust didn't remove fear. He stood for a long moment, staring at the empty road, hoping this all would end without anyone getting hurt. Meanwhile in town, the son parked near the old general store. The streets were quiet, with only a few early risers sweeping porches or preparing to open small shops. The son didn't walk with hurry. He moved with a calm, steady pace, as if he were just another customer going about his day. He started with the bakery, where the owner, a kind older woman with tired eyes, greeted him warmly. She had known him since he was a child, often giving him cookies when he came with his father to town. When he asked her questions about the men causing trouble, she lowered her voice and looked around nervously before speaking. "They've been walking around for months," she whispered. "Some of us want to speak up, but we're scared. They don't like questions." The son thanked her gently and left. He then visited the hardware store. The owner, a quiet man who rarely spoke more than a few words, surprised the son by sharing more than he expected. He told him about some workers being threatened, tools stolen in the night, the men bragging loudly in a small bar near the edge of town. "They think no one will stand up to them." The owner said softly, "Everyone's too scared." The son nodded. "They're wrong." By noon, the son had a mental map where the group went, who they targeted, when they usually moved. He didn't confront them. Not yet. He observed. He waited. He let them act naturally, unaware that someone was finally watching carefully. Late in the afternoon, he drove back home. His father was in the shed trying to repair a broken gate latch, though his hands weren't steady. The son walked in quietly and sat beside him. "You were gone long?" the father said, pretending his voice was steady. "I needed to know everything," his son replied. "And what did you find?" His son leaned back against the wall. "They've hurt more people than you imagined. Not physically, just enough to scare them, enough to make them think resistance isn't worth it." The father looked down. "These are good people they're scaring. People who work hard. That's why it's going to stop," his son said firmly. The father hesitated. "Are you sure the people you called? We'll handle it?" "I don't want trouble to fall on you," the son gave a gentle smile. "Dad, handling situations like this is part of what I trained for. And I didn't call just anyone. I called people who actually care." The father wanted to believe that, but worry still tightened his chest. That evening, as the sun was dipping low behind the hills, the son stepped outside and stood near the old wooden fence facing the road. He stayed still, watching the horizon, as if he expected something to happen. The father came out quietly. "You're waiting for them again?" "Yes," the son said softly. "Because the more they think you're alone, the more careless they become." And the father's heart clenched. "I don't want you putting yourself between me and danger." The son turned to him with calm, kind eyes. "You've spent your whole life protecting me. Let me protect you now." Before the father could reply, they both heard the distant rumble of an engine. The sound grew louder, and the father felt his heart jump. "That's them," he whispered. His son nodded once. "Stay back." The father didn't argue this time. He stepped onto the porch and stood behind the railing, gripping it tightly. The truck rolled into the yard and stopped. The same three men stepped out, but this time their energy was different. They didn't look amused or relaxed. Their eyes were sharper, colder. They had heard that the farmer's son had been asking questions around town. One of them smirked. "You again." The son didn't move. "You came back sooner than I expected." The leader raised an eyebrow. "We heard you've been poking around where you shouldn't, going into shops, talking to people. That's not very smart." The son's voice stayed calm. "I'm just learning how much damage you've done." The leader took a step forward, hands in his pockets. "Listen, you can pretend you're some hero, but you don't know what you're dealing with." "I know enough," the son replied. The leader tilted his head. "We hear you left home years ago, came back with a bad attitude. Maybe you should go back to wherever you came from. Because here, we run things." The father felt a tremor shake through him. He wanted to yell at them to leave. He wanted to step beside his son, but he stayed still, trusting his son's judgment. The sun was almost set now. Painting the yard with long shadows, the son took a slow breath. "You won't run anything for long." The leader laughed harshly. "Who's going to stop us?" "You don't make me laugh. You think we're scared because you walk around like you're someone important?" The son held the leader's gaze for a long moment. His voice remained quiet, but there was a sharpness in it now. "You should be careful who you threaten. And why is that?" The leader mocked. The son stepped a little closer, not aggressively, just enough to remove any doubt about his confidence. Because you have no idea who you're dealing with, he said calmly. And you have no idea who already knows what you've done. A flicker of uncertainty crossed the leader's face. What's that supposed to mean? It means your time of walking around this town pretending to be untouchable is over. The men exchanged uneasy glances. Something about the son's calmness bothered them. He wasn't scared. He wasn't even tense. He stood there like someone who knew something they didn't. What did you do? The second man demanded. Nothing yet, the son replied. But other people are already moving. The father watched the confusion forming on the men's faces. They weren't expecting this. They were used to people shrinking back, apologizing, begging. Not this steady, unshakable calm. The leader crossed his arms. You're bluffing. The son smiled faintly. If I were bluffing, you wouldn't be this nervous. For the first time since they started extorting the town, the leader didn't have a comeback. He stared at the son, trying to read him, trying to understand why he wasn't afraid. Then the son took a final step forward, his voice low enough that only they could hear. Walk away now. Because if you're still here tomorrow, you won't be walking anywhere. The men stiffened. The father felt the air tighten. His son wasn't making a threat. His tone wasn't wild or emotional. He was stating a fact. The leader opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Something deep in his instincts told him not to push further. Not today. We're leaving, he said finally, though his voice wasn't as steady as before. But this isn't done. The son nodded once. You're right. It isn't. The men climbed back into the truck, slamming the doors harder than necessary. The engine roared. The truck sped away down the dirt road. Only when they were gone did the father exhale. He stepped closer to his son. What happens now? His son didn't take his eyes off the road. Now, he said quietly, we wait. The father swallowed. For what? His son finally looked at him. For the people I called? They're coming soon. That night, the father couldn't sleep. He sat in the small living room, staring at the clock on the wall. Hours passed slowly. His son sat nearby, calm and steady, though he remained fully awake, listening to every sound outside. Just past midnight, the son's phone buzzed with a single message. He read it, nodded to himself, then stood. They're close, he said. The father's heart raced. Ooh. My team, the son replied softly. The ones who handle cases like this? Before the father could ask more, the distant sound. A vengeance approached, not loud like the extortionist truck, but controlled, professional. Multiple vehicles slow, precise. The son opened the front door and stepped outside. The father followed, heart pounding in his chest. Down the long dirt road. Dark shapes appeared in marked vehicles, moving with quiet purpose. The son whispered, "It's time." And the father realized something powerful. His son hadn't come home to fight. He had come home to finish this properly. The next morning began quietly. But there was a different kind of silence around the farm. It wasn't the peaceful kind that usually made the place feel warm and safe. It was the kind that came right before something important was about to happen. The son woke up early, even before the sun had fully risen, and stepped onto the porch with a cup of warm tea. He stared out at the fields his father had spent his whole life caring for, the same fields the extortion group had tried to threaten and damage. He felt a calm determination building inside him. He had dealt with dangerous people before, but this time it felt personal. This time it was for his father. His father walked out a little later, moving slowly, like someone carrying too many thoughts at once. He didn't want trouble. He never had. He always believed a quiet life was the best life. And now he realized that some people take advantage of that quietness. He looked at his son and wanted to say something, maybe to tell him not to risk anything, but he saw the steady expression on his son's face and stopped himself. Instead, he said softly, "Be careful today." The son nodded with a gentle smile. "Everything will be okay, I promise." Later in town, the extortion group was already planning their next move. They had no idea who they were dealing with, and they still believed the farmer and his son were just another easy target. They gathered in their usual spot, talking loudly about how much more they could squeeze out of the farm. One of them mentioned taking a piece of land next time. Another laughed and said the farmer was too scared to fight back. They spoke with false confidence, unaware that their words would soon come back to them in a way they never expected. While they talked, the son met with two people quietly in a nearby city. They weren't in uniforms, and they didn't move like regular workers or office people. Their calmness, focus, and serious expressions told a clear story. They were trained, experienced, and here for a reason. They listened carefully as the son explained everything he had observed about the extortion group, their behavior, their patterns, their threats, and how far they seemed willing to go. These agents didn't speak loudly or dramatically. They simply nodded, asked a few precise questions, and began preparing. They discussed a plan that would allow things to unfold naturally without causing panic in the town. The son didn't want a dramatic show. He didn't want to scare innocent people. He only wanted justice for his father and safety for everyone who had been living in fear of this group. After hours of planning, observing, and confirming information, the team was ready. They agreed that they needed solid evidence, something clear, recorded, and undeniable. Something that would make sure the extortionists couldn't twist the story or pretend they were innocent later. They needed the group to reveal their intentions clearly, and they needed to catch them in the act. When the son returned to the farm that afternoon, his father was waiting with quiet concern. He asked if everything was all right, and the son reassured him gently. "We just need to play along for a little longer. I need them to believe they still have control. After that, things will move fast." His father didn't like the idea of pretending to give in to the group, but he trusted his son. He had always trusted him. He watched the way his son carried himself, calm, steady, never rushing him, felt a little more at ease. They shared a simple dinner and tried to talk about other things, like the crops growing well, despite the recent stress. But both knew their minds were somewhere else. Later that evening, the son made a call. It was short, quiet, and direct. He used the same steady voice he always used when he had made up his mind. When he ended the call, the plan was officially set into motion. The next day, the extortion group arrived again. Their truck rumbled loudly as it drove down the dirt road toward the farm. Their footsteps were heavy, confident, and full of the same arrogance they had shown before. They didn't hide their intentions. The one who usually spoke stepped forward and told the farmer that they wanted more money, double this time. And they wanted it soon. The son stepped out calmly, as if he had expected the visit. He didn't look angry or scared. He simply spoke with the same soft, steady tone he always used. He said he needed a little more time to gather the money and suggested they meet somewhere the next day where they could talk without drawing attention. The group exchanged glances, surprised by how easy things seemed. They smirked, thinking they'd finally broken him. They agreed to meet in an old, unused barn on the edge of the town. It wasn't far from the fields, but far enough that no one else would be around. They believed it was the perfect place to pressure the farmer into signing over a piece of his land. They didn't know that the location had already been found by the federal team, checked, and prepared for what was about to happen. When the group drove away, the father let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He looked at his son with a mixture of worry and hope. "Are you sure this is safe?" The son placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "I've done this before. They won't touch you again. Trust me." The father nodded slowly. He didn't like the idea of walking into a meeting with people who had been threatening them, but he trusted his son more than anyone. He felt comforted knowing the plan wasn't reckless. It wasn't based on anger or revenge. It was organized, legal, and carefully thought out. The next morning, the old barn stood quietly under the sunlight. It looked abandoned from the outside, dusty, worn, and forgotten by the town. But inside, it was not empty today. Before dawn, the federal team had quietly set up small recording devices, hidden cameras, in a safe position outside, where they could observe without being seen. Everything was ready long before the extortion group even woke up. When the father and son arrived a little later, they walked calmly. The father looked nervous, but the son stayed right beside him, whispered reassuringly, reminding him this would be over soon. A few minutes later, the extortion group's truck pulled in. They stepped out with the same confident attitude. They didn't see anything unusual. They didn't sense that they were being watched or recorded. They walked into the barn, thinking they were in full control. The moment the meeting started, everything unfolded exactly as planned. The group demanded money again and began speaking openly about the earlier threats, believing no one else was around. They talked about what they wanted from the farmer, how they planned to pressure him, how they felt he had no choice but to obey them. They didn't realize every word was being captured, clearly by the hidden equipment. The son stayed calm and continued the conversation naturally, encouraging them to speak plainly without making it obvious. He didn't provoke them or create tension. He simply asked questions and allowed them to reveal themselves. His father stayed close, taking slow breaths and trying not to show how anxious he felt. Then the group made their biggest mistake. They started insisting that the farmer needed to sign away part of his land or face more trouble. They said it with complete confidence, believing the son and father were trapped. The son listened quietly, waited until they finished speaking, and then finally gave a small nod. That nod was the signal. In an instant, the air outside shifted. The sound of quiet footsteps moved in synchronization. As the federal team stepped forward, the extortion group turned in confusion when they heard the movement. But by the time they tried to understand what was happening, the team had already entered the barn calmly and professionally. There was no loud shouting, no chaos. Everything happened smoothly, just the way trained agents worked. The extortionists were too shocked to even argue. Their faces changed quickly from arrogance to disbelief as they realized they had walked straight into a trap. They were guided outside quietly, their confusion growing with each step. They finally understood why the son had never looked scared, why he always stayed calm, why he always seemed one step ahead. The father watched everything with wide eyes. For weeks, he had lived in fear of these men. For weeks, he had felt helpless. But now, seeing them being escorted away without any drama or danger, he felt a weight lifting off his shoulders. His son walked over to him and placed a reassuring hand on his back. "It's over," he said softly. The father didn't say anything right away. He just nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and pride. He looked at the barn, at the agents working quietly, and then back at his son. Realizing how much he truly didn't know about his own child's strength and training. But one thing was clear, his son had brought peace back to their lives in the safest, most controlled way possible. As the sun rose higher, the farm returned to its natural quiet, and for the first time in weeks, the silence felt peaceful again. The morning after everything happened, the farm felt different in a way that was hard to put into words. The sky looked the same, the fields were the same, and the old house stood exactly where it always had. But the air felt lighter, like someone had taken a heavy blanket off the land. For the first time in weeks, the father woke up without fear sitting in the back of his mind. He stepped outside and looked across the field. The sun was rising slowly, touching the soil with a soft glow. It reminded him of how many mornings he had stood in that same spot, wondering how he would protect his farm, his workers, and himself. Now, for the first time, he felt safe again. Truly safe. Inside the house, his son was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a notebook open. He wasn't working or planning anything serious. He was simply writing down a few things he wanted to fix on the farm. The small things he had noticed while everything was happening: loose boards, weak fencing, some tools that needed repair. It was his way of grounding himself after days of tension. When his father stepped inside, he looked up and smiled. "You're up early," the father said kindly. "Couldn't sleep much," the son replied, but in a peaceful tone. "Thought I'd take care of the little things today." The father sat across from him. For a moment, they didn't speak. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, just a quiet moment of understanding. Then the father said softly, "Thank you for everything." The son shook his head. "You don't have to thank me. I just did what anyone would do for their family." But the father knew better. Not everyone could have done what his son did. Not everyone had the skills, the calmness, or the ability to bring a situation like that to an end without making things worse. He felt proud, deeply proud, but also grateful that his son had stayed by his side without letting anger take over. Around mid-morning, a few neighbors stopped by the farm. They had heard rumors about what happened, though no one knew the full story. People said the troublemakers were gone, taken by officials, and wouldn't be returning. Some neighbors admitted they had been scared to speak up earlier, but were relieved that someone had finally put an end to the fear spreading through the area. One neighbor brought fresh bread. Another brought vegetables from their garden. It wasn't much, but it was their way of saying they cared. The father appreciated the gestures more than they realized. For weeks he had felt isolated, as if everyone was pulling away to avoid becoming targets themselves. Now they were returning, slowly but genuinely. The son stepped out to greet them with a friendly smile. He didn't talk about what happened. He didn't mention the plan, the agents, or how close things had come. He simply listened to them, thanked them, and helped them carry their baskets inside. He didn't want attention or praise. That wasn't who he was. After the neighbors left, he went back to the barn and started fixing some loose panels. His movements were quiet, steady, and thoughtful. He worked the way someone works when they want to feel connected to the land again. He didn't rush or stress. He just focused on the moment. The father watched him from the porch, feeling a warmth in his chest. The farm looked peaceful again because of him. The father knew his son had another life, a life full of responsibility, rules, and dangerous tasks. He knew his son wouldn't be able to stay forever, but seeing him work like this made the father wish time would slow down. Just a little, around noon, the father joined him in the barn with 2 cups of cold water. They sat on a bench and rested in the shade. The father took a slow sip and then asked, "When do you have to go back?" The son looked down at the dusty floor and sighed softly. "Soon they'll need me, but not today." The father nodded. He had expected that answer, but hearing it out loud still made his heart sink a bit. "I'm glad you're here now," he said. "That's enough." The son smiled and said, "I'll always be here when you need me. You know that." For a moment, the barn was filled with nothing but the soft creaking of old wood and the sound of birds outside. The son leaned back and closed his eyes. The father did the same. It felt like all the stress of the past weeks was fading into the air. Later in the afternoon, some workers returned to the fields. They had left briefly after the threats began, afraid of what might happen if they stayed. But now they came back, smiling and waving at the father. One of them said, "We heard everything is safe now. We're ready to work again." The father felt emotionally hearing that. He tried to speak, but his voice shook slightly. He nodded and said, "Thank you. It means a lot." The son helped them get organized. He didn't take charge or act like a leader. He simply supported them, handed out tools, and offered small suggestions. He wanted things to return to normal, not revolve around him. Throughout the day, the farm slowly regained its rhythm. The sound of tools, footsteps, and soft conversations returned. The workers laughed again. Even the animals seemed calmer. The entire place felt alive in a way it hadn't for a long time, as the sun began to lower. Painting the sky with gentle orange light, the father and son sat on the porch again. They watched the workers heading home and the fields settling into evening quietness. "Do you think they'll come back?" the father asked suddenly, even though he already knew the answer. The son shook his head. "No. Everything was handled properly. It's not just about them being taken away. It's about the evidence. The law will take care of it. They won't be able to return here or bother anyone else." The father let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "Good," he said softly. "Good." A few minutes passed before the father spoke again. "You know, the whole time this was happening, I thought maybe I had done something wrong. Maybe I wasn't strong enough. Maybe I made myself an easy target." The son turned to him gently. "You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes people try to take advantage of good, quiet people. That's not your fault. And you weren't alone, even when you thought you were." The father nodded, looking down at his hands. "I forget that sometimes." The son placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "But I don't." As evening came fully, the farm grew calm. The sky darkened slowly, and the first stars appeared. The father went inside to prepare a simple dinner, while the son stayed on the porch a little longer, thinking deeply. He knew he would be returning to his work soon, but he also knew his father would be safe now. The thought brought him peace. During dinner, the father told small stories from years ago, stories his son had heard before, but always enjoyed. Stories about storms they survived, good harvest seasons, and funny mistakes that happened in the fields. They laughed softly, something they hadn't done in weeks. After eating, they cleaned up the kitchen together. The father washed dishes, while the son dried them. It was a small moment, but it felt meaningful. It reminded both of them that life doesn't only move through big events. It also moves through simple routines moments, shared quietly between people who care for each other. Later that night, they stepped outside one last time before going to bed. The sky was clear and the air was cool. The son looked at the stars and said, "This place always feels different at night. Peaceful." The father nodded. "It's always been peaceful. I just forgot how it felt for a while." The son smiled gently. "You'll feel it again every day, you two," the father said softly. The son hesitated, then replied, "Whenever I can." They shared a long, quiet moment, standing side by side under the night sky. No words were needed. Everything important had already been said. When they went inside, the father felt lighter than he had in a long time. He slept peacefully, knowing the danger was gone. The son lay awake a bit longer, thinking about the past few days, the risks, the plans, and the outcome. He knew he would soon be called back to his duties. But he also knew he had done everything he could, Haran done it the right way. In the morning, he stepped outside before the sun rose, just like he always did. He looked at the fields, at the quiet road, at the familiar land that shaped his childhood. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "Everything's safe now." It was. For the father, life returned to the peaceful rhythm he had always cherished. For the workers, the farm felt like a safe place again. For the neighbors, the town regained its calm. And for the son, even though he carried many responsibilities, he left knowing that the people he loved were protected. The troublemakers, chosen the wrong farmer to threaten, not because the farmer was strong, but because his son was someone they never should have underestimated. Someone who stepped in with patience, strategy, and calm strength. Someone who turned the story around without ever raising his voice. In the end, the farm stood tall again, just like it always had. And the father knew something deep and comforting. No matter how quiet his life was, he was never truly alone.